Well, my Let's Keep It Real people. I'm so excited about my next guest. Well, for many reasons, but I have so many questions that I want to ask him. I'll try to get all yours in, but I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. But before I bring him in, let me tell you about Dr. Danny Brassell. He is a highly sought after speaker, trainer, and coach known as Jim Carrey with a Ph.D. He's spoken over 3,500 audiences. That's right, 3,500 audiences worldwide and authored 16 books, including his latest, Leadership Begins with Motivation. He coaches business owners, entrepreneurs, and executives how to increase their income, freedom, and impact by creating engaging presentations. Danny, oh my gosh. And I found out he's in Colorado. Why didn't I do this in person?
Sounds good to me. I'd love to grab a coffee.
I am so pumped that you're here. And we have a million questions. I'm going to try to ask everybody's questions, not mine. But the first one is your one word. What pops into your head? One word to describe the past 30 days. And then
Uh,
tell us why.
Simplify.
Okay. I've never had that in all these years. Tell me more.
Well, I'm trying to simplify my life. That's why I stopped watching TV, reading, surrounding myself with positive things, coming up with better systems, trying to learn AI, trying to keep up. But I still want to simplify. It all comes down to I have my planner and I do my pre-week planning, and so I know what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and trying to make sure that I don't know if balance is the correct word, but I'm trying to make sure I'm devoting my attention to specific things at specific times.
Oh. So when you say simplify, do you feel like right now you have too many things going on, or are you right where you want to be?
Oh, I always have too many pots on the stoves, Sandy. I'm a puppy dog.
I'm like a squirrel. Like, where's the nut? Where's the nut?
That's right.
All right. So here's the deal. When I'm looking at all the stuff and everything you want to do, I so relate to it. And there's so much we have in common. And I love the fact that you've worn a lot of hats. I mean, a ton. And we'll get into that. But what is because I might just write it down for mine. What is your overall mission? Because maybe it'll help me with mine. I don't know.
Which would be great, Sandy. It's funny. I was speaking to a gentleman last week, and he's like, "Well, why would I tell you this? You're my competition." And I said, "Well, that's where you and I differ. I have no competition. I only have potential collaborators." He's a very limited mindset. My mission is to bring joy back into education in the workplace, and I do that in four different ways. First of all, I speak over 100 days a year all over the world, primarily to schools and parent groups, but also to corporations trying to re-energize their organizations. Second of all, I have the world's top reading engagement program, which in just over 2 months shows parents how to get their kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading, because I find that schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read, because
What
I've
is
never had
that?
to tell a
Yeah.
kid, go turn on the TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it because they love it already.
Mm.
Third, I work, and you had said this in your introduction, very kind introduction of me. I work with entrepreneurs, executives, and business owners all around the world on crafting powerful presentations that get their audience to take the next step, whether that's to purchase their product, to donate to their cause, or even to
Mm.
invest in their idea. And then finally, I'm the North American CEO of a company called Cyber Smarties, which was founded in 2015 by Diarmuid Hudner in Ireland. It's a social media platform for kids ages 5 to 12 that teaches kids positive social media habits. Social media is just like all technology. It just kind of appeared one day and nobody ever taught anybody how to use it. And what usually happens is the lowest common denominator takes over. And I'm trying to show people positive ways to use that technology. So that's a very long answer to a short question.
No, that's good. It's actually going to be an organized conversation. We can build off that. By the way, my mission is it's everywhere. It's been easy. It's to spread joy. I've thought my middle name is Joy. So, I mean, right when you said bring joy to education, and it just so happens 2 weeks ago, I was asked to teach my 6-week mental strength program. You ready for this?
But
To high-risk high school kids. And boy, oh boy, are they teaching me a thing or two. I'm like, I can relate to everyone. I'll find out. Going in there tomorrow, do you have any tips? They're all boys,
mhm.
some court appointed, living there, and they're coming from, I'm sure you can relate to this because of your background. If you knew my life, and if you knew how my brain worked, you'd realize there is no hope. And I get it. I mean, they're in the thick of it, Danny. I mean, really thick of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I taught for many years in South Central Los Angeles to the quote high risk kids. I think all
Yeah.
kids are high risk.
Yeah.
Everybody needs a mentor. When I taught middle school, I was the only teacher in the school that all of my students were always on time to class. I never had a tardy student. And the reason was because I always started class by reading aloud a Paul Harvey story. I don't know if you remember Paul Harvey. I'm older than you.
No,
Growing
no,
up,
no. I remember Paul Harvey. Yeah.
well, I used to, he'd come on the radio every day at 12:15 and say, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And the whole time you're trying to guess who's he talking about or what's the company or whatever. And my students always love those. The problem is a lot of those stories are outdated. They're about people like Sears and Roebuck. Well, kids today don't know what Sears and Roebuck are. And so the last book that I wrote, the Leadership Begins with Motivation book, it's kind of an homage to Paul Harvey with just short stories to get. And so this is what I would do with the students you're working with tomorrow. I always engage them. I always start with a story. So if you'll let me, I'm just going to read a quick story to you, and
I love it. I love stories.
I'll send this to you. You can use it tomorrow with your high risk boys. On the morning of January 17th, 1977, Gary Gilmore, in a plain t-shirt strapped into a chair with a bag over his head, awaited a firing squad of 5 law enforcement officers to execute him at the state prison in Draper, Utah. Convicted of murdering a gas station employee and motel manager in Utah the year before, Gilmore would be the first person in the United States to be executed in nearly a decade. Shortly before his execution, prison officials asked Gilmore if he had any last words. Neither he nor anyone else that day would know the impact of those words. Over 10 years later, in 1988, Dan Wieden, an advertising executive who co-founded the Wieden and Kennedy Agency in Portland, Oregon, made something of a morbid pitch to a struggling fashion company. He recalled the inmate's final words and used a slight variation for his pitch, and seemingly everyone hated his idea for the company's new slogan. Trust me on this one, Wieden implored the company's co-founder. And the co-founder, his company, and the public have not looked back since. The co-founder's name was Phil Knight. The struggling brand he co-founded was a shoe company called Nike. And advertising executive Dan Wieden slightly altered death row inmate Gary Gilmore's final words, let's do it, into the phrase, just do it. So I do stories like that, and the kids
I
all.
love that. Wait, I'm taking notes. I know all those
I'll
people. I
send it to
didn't
you
know those
afterwards.
facts.
Yeah, but it's interesting, Sandy, because after I wrote the book, I then actually read the book, and I was reading the stories, and completely unintentionally, so many of my examples are of white male Americans. And so the book I'm writing right now is a collection of stories predominantly featuring females, minorities, and international examples. I actually, just before I got on, I was writing a story about Yang Kum. I'm very excited about this story about Yang Kum. So, but that's how you reach kids, is you have to show them that their problems are not isolated. Somebody has had a problem similar or maybe even more daunting, and they were able to overcome that. That's what you have to provide, is that joy, that hope. Is I was speaking at an event a couple of weeks ago. I felt kind of bad because the previous 2 speakers, they said, enjoy the journey. And I felt bad because I started off my speech. I said, you ever notice the people who say enjoy the journey have already succeeded? I mean, when you're writing that journey, you can't make rent. You're like, wow, I'm really enjoying this and I'm starving to death. This is a lot of fun. No, they're not enjoying the journey. The journey stinks.
Oh, God.
So talk like that to your high risk kids today. And again, I always
Yeah.
say all kids are high risk, all
Yeah.
kids are
Yeah.
special needs, all kids are gifted and talented. It just depends on how you treat people.
And that's, I'm so glad you said it because that's the deal. These kids, and even some of the counselors will say that they don't get treated with the same respect. They know it. They know it. You know, if something goes wrong, it's definitely them getting blamed, all the time. And so they said to me, how can we make the world look at this was a big question. How can we make the world look at us differently when our own families don't stand a chance?
Ugh, that drives me nuts. Again, it's about this is what you do for a living is you're providing joy, you're providing hope. You're
Yeah,
showing
yeah,
them, hey, I was speaking at an all-girls school in India several years ago, 5 years ago actually. And at the end of the presentation, these two beautiful seniors come up to me. One wants to be an attorney, the other one wants to be a doctor. I said, that's
yeah.
great. Are you going to go to university here in India, or maybe you'll go to the United Kingdom, or maybe even the United States? And they said, oh, we're girls. We can't leave India. I'm like, get back in that auditorium. I got them all back in, got on stage. I said, now is your moment, ladies. Within the next 5 years, India is going to become the largest country on the planet, which it is now,
Yes,
in terms
yes.
of population. I'm like, you're a very young democracy. You're only 70 years old, yet you've already elected a woman prime minister. America still has not elected a woman president. I'm like, right now, there are twice as many women in India as there
Mm,
are people in the United States. There are actually more women in India with a graduate degree than there are people in the United States. And I said, you just made it my mission in life. The next president, the next CEO, and the next really good mom is coming out of this audience. This is something I always tell my students. Sometimes you need somebody else to tell you they believe in you before you believe in yourself. I believe in all of you. They only give me the best and the brightest. Now let's go out. Let's make this world a much better place. Get that into those kids' heads. Is hey, you know,
yeah, that's awesome.
things are. It only takes one.
You're
You know,
right. And you never
there's so many
know what's going to
examples.
land. I remember saying something years ago, and I thought I wasn't getting through to these kids. 7 years later, I run into someone. He's like, I went to college. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So you never know. All right. So,
I used to tell my kindergartners, I'm like, I hope to God this isn't the best year of your life. I hope it's next year and the year after that. I mean, I went to high school with guys that we played football together, and they're still talking about when we played football together. I always tell my students the windshield's a lot bigger than the rear view mirror. Let's look ahead.
oh my God, I love it. All right. So, listen, the book, The One Thing, it's like Think and Grow Rich is one of the classic books. One of my people are like, wait a minute, look at all he's done and he's successful. So maybe it's not just about the one thing, it's about being passionate when you're in it. Because I'm fascinated by the way that you were a political journalist. And I loved what you said. You're not unbiased, you just hope to be fair. I
Yeah.
I thought that was awesome.
Well, and I wasn't a political journalist. I was a journalist who was thrown into politics, which was not my intention.
Oh,
I
I didn't
wanted to be
know.
the next Charles Kuralt and go around America. The guy that has my dream job works for CBS Sunday Morning, Steve Hartman. He shows all these incredible stories about what makes America great. When I covered politicians, it was all about the negativity, trying to catch somebody in a lie, and it's
Yeah, yeah,
ultimately why I left journalism. But I still love writing, and why I'm not really interested in people that are about problems. I'm interested in people that are part of the solution. And that's why I stopped watching TV news, because everybody's just shouting at each other. And I'm like, it's a horrible model for kids. They say, you can disagree with a person without being disagreeable with that person. Respect is very important. I mean, you can say a whole bunch of things, Sandy, that I disagree with, but I will learn how to sit there, pay attention, nod my head, and maybe you're going to inform my opinion a little bit better. You might not change it. That's fine. I mean, I learned long ago people really don't agree with me on a lot of things. That's fine. One of my mentors, Jack Canfield, he used to have a phrase I loved. He said, SW, 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 SW. Some will, some won't. So what? Someone's waiting. So
oh my God, I love that.
surround yourself with your own
And it's
tribe.
my initials, Sandy. I'm like, wait a minute, SW.
Hey, you can market it that way, Sandy.
That is ingenious. Okay, so let's go back, way back. Tell me about your parents. Where were you raised? How did you get into journalism?
Well, I was blessed. My parents are fantastic people. You know,
Yay!
they are. I mean, they're no longer with us, but they were wonderful people. My father was a librarian, which I always hated the library growing up. It always smelled funny. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There was always some freaky homeless guy over by the bookshelves, thought he was a vampire. I always hated. He thought it was hilarious that I became a reading professor because the kid that all I used to read as a kid was TV Guide. But it wasn't until I started teaching in the hood and I saw a lot of my students didn't have the advantages I had growing up. I mean, I was blessed. I grew up, both of my parents were present in the home. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read in front of us kids. They read to us, and we had plenty of access to reading materials. My mother was an actress, and that people always think I talk a lot. I never had a chance growing up. My mother talked all the time, and I was blessed. I was in a great home, and they were extraordinary people, and I miss them every day.
Where'd you grow up?
Gee, this is a tough one, Sandy. So I was born in Syracuse, New York, upstate New York, and then we moved to San Diego, and then I lived in Iowa Falls, Iowa, and then I lived in Waterloo, Iowa, and then we lived in Durango, Colorado. And then my parents didn't want my brother and sister to turn out like me, so they stayed in Durango, Colorado. I went off to college and went off to Washington, D.C. and Spain and Houston and L.A., and now I'm in Denver. It's crazy.
Wait a minute. Why did they move so much?
Witness protection program. No, I always say no. My dad, he was getting his
That would be
master's.
awesome.
Yeah, he got his master's in library science at Syracuse, and then he was a librarian in San Diego. Well, then in the late '70s, a law passed called Proposition 13 in California, which basically it fixed property taxes. But because of that, as a result, they fired like thousands of librarians, public servants. And so then we moved to Iowa Falls, Iowa, which is a very small town. And it was kind of tough. It was a little bit like Field of Dreams. They actually had meetings on which books to ban. My parents didn't want to be part of that. So then they thought, well, maybe we just need to move to someplace bigger. So we moved to Waterloo, Iowa. And then my parents realized, no, it's Iowa. So then we moved to Durango, Colorado. So I did middle school and high school in Durango. And Durango was just wonderful to me because I was a big fish in a small pond. And I still hold that town dear. And I try not to tell people about how wonderful it is because I don't want everybody to discover it.
Too late now. All right. So it's funny. I don't get really involved in politics, but I love DC. I love it. And my aunt, she lived there, and I don't live far from there in Philly. And she was a diplomat, and she would tell me all these crazy stories of everything that went on behind the scenes. And they had to move every 2 years. That's what they did, So when I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and I thought, what a fascinating lifestyle. Yet I understand. I wouldn't like that. I don't want to highlight the negative. I don't want to find the negative. I want to highlight all the good stuff on either side. So how did one make a jump from that to teaching in inner city LA, DC, inner city LA?
Yeah, so
Huge
that's
jump. And you didn't grow up in the hood. So I was thinking, okay, well, maybe.
Well, so I had the greatest job in the world at the time. I was working with the American Society of Newspaper Editors, which allowed me to meet every editor of every major newspaper in the country. And I was getting job offers everywhere. And a major daily offered me the city beat for $16,500 a year. And then a friend of mine told me, oh, they're hiring teachers in Compton, California, in South Central LA for $25,000 a year. So, Sandy, I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay, because it paid me a lot more than being a journalist.
Shut up.
And it
Shut
turned
up.
out to be a wonderful decision. I absolutely loved it. I found my tribe, and I started off. I've actually taught all age levels. I started off secondary, high school, then I went to middle school, then upper elementary to lower elementary to pretty soon. Instead of preparing students for college, I was coming home with snot marks all over my pants from my little ones hugging me all day. And what I learned is what works with a high school student does not necessarily work with a kindergartner.
No.
But what works with a kindergartner works with all age levels. I call kindergartens New York, New York. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere because they have a 7-minute attention span. And it just taught me. So now a lot of the techniques I'm training people when we're working on their presentations, they're informed by things that I learned teaching all ages, but really the little ones. The little ones were my favorite.
So I was in a room the other day, principal of school, and he said, Sandy, before you start your presentation, and I haven't heard this in years, he goes, I want you to break it down like I'm 5 years old. And I go, okay, that'll be easy.
No?
And so do you believe that? Because you're talking about that. He goes, if I can get it and understand it, then I believe my managers will understand it and get it. I go, okay. He goes, 5 years old. That's how you explain it to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, he's absolutely right. I mean, that's why I think Einstein was such an amazing scientist. There's probably other scientists that had the same capability intellectually as him, but they didn't have the power of communicating those ideas the way he was able to do it. It's why I love Richard Feynman was a Nobel Prize winning physicist. His book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, is a must read. It was fantastic. And basically, he was questioned after the space shuttle Challenger had blown up. He was questioned by a government panel on explaining it, and he took a glass of water and basically explained it so all the congressmen and the senators understood what had actually happened. And that's what you have to do. I mean, if you can't communicate it, that's why I don't understand a lot of lessons when I'm watching teachers. I'm like, just because you taught it didn't mean they learn it. And I'm constantly evaluating myself every day. Did they learn that? If you can teach 3 things a day, I tell teachers, you're doing a great job. I mean, teachers will tell me, oh, I taught 20 standards today, Dan. I'm like, really? Let's see how many they remember tomorrow. And so what you're trying to do is, how do I make myself memorable? It's the same thing I'm teaching executives on their presentations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, how do you make yourself memorable? And to me, that's what differentiates me a little bit more as somebody training people how to speak, is a lot of people, and I'm not saying this isn't effective, I'm just saying I have a problem with it. A lot of people will teach you to talk about the saddest moments of your life. Here I train people exactly the opposite. I'm like, I want you infusing a lot of humor and energy into your talk.
Yeah.
And there's 3 reasons why I say that. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad stuff happen to them. I think we need hope. We don't need to hear the sad stuff anymore. Second of all, I have a friend, and his presentation is all about his daughter being murdered in a school shooting. I don't know about you, Sandy. You got to be a lot stronger than me to talk about the worst moment of your life 1,000 times, which is what he's done.
He's reliving it.
No, it's horrible. I could never do that. And third, and this is where people get angry with me, but I have one goal when people come to my presentations. I want you to leave with a smile on your face. I want you to feel better than when you came in. I think when people tell that sad story again and again, after the 20th time, those are crocodile tears. Now you're just being manipulative. And I mean, not everybody, I can tell you, I'm not going to tell you, but I can tell you the speakers that are manipulating people with sad emotions. And I'm not saying it's not effective. It's very effective. I just have an ideological problem with that. My integrity is, I can tell you the same joke again and again. My one goal is I want you to feel better about yourself. I want you to laughing and smiling. To me, there's something noble about that. I don't like these people training people to talk about. I mean, yeah, that's me. That's me. But life's too short. I've seen tragedy as well. I mean,
it's given me food for thought, because I've been speaking for 30 some years. And my talks were always uplifting. It's mental and physical fitness, well-being, lots of entertainment. I'm a goofball. And then I wanted to up my game. So over the pandemic, when you can't travel that much, I've taken a lot of great courses in speaking, and more for timing on stage, and how to rewrite the story so you can captivate the audience. My sticky wicket is after I did all that and met with other Supreme speakers, I get slammed because I don't take them on that journey, and I don't enjoy making them sad. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, it doesn't make my whole body starts shaking. And I have those stories, but they're like, I'm making you laugh. Like, I'm presenting it in a way that's funny and humorous, because the same thing, I want to spread joy.
Mhm.
But I keep getting told over and over again, you'll never make it way up here, Weston. If you got to take them really down, bring up, you know what I mean? That's how the story goes.
Well,
You're the
yeah,
first
don't
person
get
to
me
say the
wrong.
difference.
Yeah, you could talk about your vulnerable moments. There's, I mean, as actually, and I encourage people to do that. I always tell people you shouldn't share your successes. You should share
Yeah,
all your failures,
yeah,
because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the more honest you are and candid about that, people are going to appreciate that for you. But I mean,
But
this
that's
is the
different
difference.
than making them
Yeah, to me,
cry.
to me, it's the difference between watching an American film and watching a French film. When I watch American films, I know if Julia Roberts gets killed in the middle of the movie, I know they're going to resuscitate her and she's going to be alive at the end, because that's a happy ending. In France, I'll be watching a French film and the main character dies midway through, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I think this person's actually dead. And they never, like, it's always just depressing. It depresses the heck out of me. I'm like, so I don't have a
Yeah,
problem with people taking you down that journey, but to me, you need to end on the up note. You need to show
yeah,
people
yes,
that.
absolutely. Yeah. And I do, my whole body goes like, they're laughing, they're having a good time, but when I see their faces on, I'm like, ooh, bring it back up. So the point I'm getting out of this is that it's okay that they're a little sad, and it's okay that I don't want to make them stay there, but I gotta at least tell them somewhat about why they should believe what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and you can talk about sad things also. Like, so last week, one of the speakers I was working with, she's not a speaker, she's a business owner, but she'd survived cancer. And I said, don't get me wrong, you can talk about your cancer, but let's give a wink to the audience. Let's show them
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you can laugh about
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Jimmy Kimmel, I remember one of his kids was born with some kind of defect, and he was a mess. And he starts his routine. He's in tears. He's like, I'm going to take the next 20 minutes. I'm going to tell you everything that's happened in the last 48
Mm.
hours. And I know I'm a wreck, but just so you know, there's a happy ending. And I thought, wow, that was really clever of him, because now we're not uncomfortable.
Whoa.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
not uncomfortable listening to the story because we know he's going to overcome it. And that's important.
So basically, then it's about being on the other side of it. Because when you're up there, like you said, if that guy is up there, whether he's telling the same story about his daughter, whatever, if he can get into that place of hope,
Yeah.
love, peace, or joy, then he's not depressed and sad. He's doing it to serve the audience. He's on the other side of it. And I always said, I can tell when the speaker is still in it and they're making me uncomfortable. The same story, the other person's on the other side of it.
Yeah. The best speakers, if one of my favorite speakers, his name is George Campbell, but his stage name is Joe Malarkey. 60 Minutes did a piece on him several years ago. He tags himself as the world's worst motivational speaker, and he's just hilarious. He says, a lot of people tell you to set goals. I say don't do that because you'll fail. That's not fun. It cracks me up. But at the end, he gives a really serious point, but he's also able to infuse his
Yeah.
humor.
Yeah.
He's talking about, the opposite of success is not failure. You need to fail in order to succeed. The opposite of success is not trying. And he ends. Thomas Edison wrote down in his journal that people had told him he had failed 10,000 times trying to invent the light bulb. And Thomas Edison wrote, I have not failed 10,000 times. I have found 10,000 ways on how not to invent a light bulb. Then he pauses. At least that's what we think he wrote. He was writing in the dark, and it's great. I love that ending because he's making a serious point, but then he has to have his. And I'm like, that's what the best. That's why I love.
Yeah, that's awesome.
See how they. I mean, it's horrible. As I get older, it turns out all of my idols turn out to be scumbags. But I grew up. You're in the Philadelphia area. My idol growing up was Bill Cosby. I absolutely loved Bill Cosby. I mean, the guy can talk about nothing for 90 minutes and you're hanging on every single word because he knows
Absolutely.
the story. And I still train people. I say, if you really want to craft something, do it the way Cosby used to do it, because the guy hits the points throughout. I mean, he can talk about serious things, but make it so lighthearted that you're laughing about his pain. And just wonderful. And that's why I'm always I watch probably 10 speakers a day still.
Oh,
And
do you?
yeah, I tell people there's two ways to become a better speaker. First of all, watch lots of speakers. I mean, I'm watching people in front of large groups, in front of small groups, in front of men, in front of women, international audiences. I watch televangelists, I watch comedians, I watch politicians. Here's a strategy for those people in your audience trying to figure out, how do I craft a powerful message where I connect. I watch a lot of award shows, because when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to give a speech. Now, most people, they waste their time. They'll be like, I want to thank God and the Academy. It's just stupid. It's completely meaningless to everybody watching. But there was a guy a couple of years ago, I believe his name was Joe Walker. So he won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing, which nobody's paying attention to because they're all important. They're actors. Oh, I'm much more important than a film editor. And so Joe Walker gets up there, and he's British. And I loved his speech. He says very slowly, he says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now they're panning the audience and people are kind of paying attention to what he's saying. And he says, for example, yesterday I got into an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing. He gets off stage. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Like, in 30 seconds, he connected with his audience. That's the power of a great presentation. And so if you want to get better at speaking, first of all, you have to watch lots of speakers. And then second of all, one of my mentors was a guy named Jim Rohn, and Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. Translation, you got to go out and speak. You just said it. Sandy, you've been speaking for 37 years. I bet you so many people told you couldn't do a podcast. Well, now you're doing a podcast, and probably your first 20 episodes stink, but after a while, you get used to it. You get much better at it. And this is what I always tell people. That I'm like, the first time you give a speech, it's going to stink.
Yeah.
And then the next day you do it, it's going to stink, but it's going to stink a little bit less than the previous day. And after about 20 times, you're going to start feeling comfortable. I mean, the first time you work with high at-risk youth, you're going to feel nervous. Yeah. But as you do it again and again,
you're going to ate me alive the first time. I'm like, not again.
That's good.
By the way, there was the competition, and it was called the Great American Speak Off or something.
Yeah.
And it was about, you had 1 minute to say, and you had all this criteria. My husband goes, why the heck are you doing it? I go, because I want to be challenged. How am I going to stand out and say all that, tell a story, my mission, where I'm from, and all, and I got only 1 minute. It was awesome. I mean, the first time I did it, it was horrible, but you know what I mean? Like, I got better and better. And I thought about that, how can you say exactly, in 30 seconds and make an impact? It's crazy. It's fun to practice,
Absolutely. And I guarantee that what a great exercise for you, Sandy. I'm actually a judge for the Great American Speak Off. And I always tell the people I'm judging, I'm like, just so you know, there are people that have been speaking for 40 years that can't do what you're doing, giving a 1 minute speech, because a minute is nothing. I was actually blessed because I was in a speaking competition once, and it was 10 minutes I was allowed.
Ooh.
The next day I had to do a TED Talk, which was 18 minutes, and 18 minutes felt like an eternity after doing 10 minutes. I've also done 5 minutes, I've done 3 minutes, I've done 1 minute, and that's another strategy I share with people. I was once at a conference, and I was sitting next to a pretty famous athlete, and the conference organizer noticed him and got him up on stage. Hey, come up on stage. Tell the 1,000 people here today over the next 7 minutes what you're up to. And that was an important lesson for me, Sandy. It taught me have a 60-minute version, a 45-minute version, a 30-minute version, a 15. And because you never know when somebody's going to ask you to speak in front of 1,000 people. Are you ready? I mean, that's where, preparation is, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable when you're prepared. When I was in college, I went into a final exam once, and I told the professor, I'm like, wow, I hope I do well. And he said, well, I hope you studied. He's like, once you set the ball on the roulette wheel, it's all a bunch of
Yeah.
chance at that
Yeah.
point. And he's basically saying, there's no
Yeah.
chance in this. Either you studied or you didn't. And it's the same thing with people I work with on their presentations. Either you do the work or you don't. And I avoided coaching people for a long time because I'm a person that I want you to succeed. And so I have a 2-step plan. I'm like, okay, so step number 1, listen to what I have to say. Step number 2, do it.
You're really asking a lot, aren't you?
It's amazing how many people fail to do step 2, and a lot of them fail to do step 1 as well.
Well, I'm feeling better because I've been doing a lot of different story slams, and they're either 3 or 5 minutes. And if I can slightly figure out how I can, be in the theme they have, I go up, because I just got a TED talk in April in
Mhm.
HX and North Carolina. And my husband goes, "Why are you doing all these story slams?" I go, "Because I want to just keep getting myself up on stage." They're 5 minutes. This TED talk is 8 to 10, but still in all, it's the same thing. And the one I just did, everyone's like, "You nailed it." I go, "You know how many times I said that to my dog? 50 times, over and over and over and over."
Good
So
for
then I got
you.
up there and it seemed relaxed, like, she's winging it. I think most of the people I see that wing it aren't really winging it most.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, Robin Williams was my favorite improv artist, and there was nothing improvised about what he did. He practiced a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and the magic is that he makes it look like it's fresh.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, listen, I better get to these or they're going to kick my butt.
Okay, right.
So, reading, the minutes matters. This is what I got back from, I'll call them Sally Bell and Billy Bob.
Uh-huh.
What about listening to books? Because so many of these people say, "I have no time to read, but I do listen to audibles 1 book a week." Is it the same thing? Please
Yeah.
ask me.
Short answer is yes. The research is very clear on this. I'm one of these dorks that actually reads every government study over the last 75 years. A Nation at Risk, Becoming a Nation of Readers, the National Reading Panel, and all of these studies are about 2,000 pages long. And it's usually on page 100 where they have a single paragraph that says, "The research seems to suggest the single best way to learn how to read is to be read aloud to." Then it never mentions it again because it sounds way too simple. One of my mentors was Jim Trelease, who wrote the Read Aloud Handbook, and he always used to say, if reading aloud was $129, every parent in America would rush out and buy it. And if we found out kids didn't like it, they would mandate it in the school system tomorrow. It sounds so simple, and yet it's so effective. I work with a lot of dyslexics. Actually, a
Mhm.
lot of people don't know this. Over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs are dyslexic. Dyslexics tend to process information a lot better through their ears. And so
Yes.
the first strategy I always tell them, I'm like, listen to, well, I used to say books on tape. Now there's no tape, listen to our Audible books.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just as good. I mean, I listen to podcasts like yours. There's a lot of great podcasts out there. I'm constantly listening to, I had read the physical copy of Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, his autobiography, but it was wonderful as a treat. I had to drive for a long time to a speaking engagement. And so I went on Libby, one of my favorite apps. Libby gives you access to every library book on the planet. And so I listened to the audio,
Libby.
and it was great because Libby allowed me to listen to Matthew McConaughey actually narrates his own book, and it's
Uh,
wonderful. It's his voice, and there was things I had missed when I read it, but listening to him, I picked up a lot more, and I was like, wow, this is absolutely wonderful. So yeah, the short answer to that question is yes. Listen to those Audible books. I encourage everybody to do that.
What about one of the parents said, "What age should I encourage my kids to start listening instead of just reading?"
So Harvard did a study. By the way, whenever I cite research, I always say Harvard did the study. It sounds much more legitimate that way. So Harvard did a study. This was actually
Gone down the road, did a study, blind study.
I'm like, why is it more legitimate because it came out of Harvard? There's plenty of competent people at Texas A&M and Purdue. So this was a cool study. So they followed 40 pregnant women, and every single night their husband would read aloud to the womb Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham. And when all of the babies were born, they had a research assistant read aloud 5 different stories to each baby, and each baby had a visual reaction to green eggs and ham. So the answer is preconception. And people always ask me, when should you stop reading to kids? I say, when they're 6 feet under. I mean, I still love listening to great storytellers, and that's
Oh
absolutely.
my God.
And this is something you can do. There's simple strategies I share with parents all the time. So a lot of parents, because that's what I emphasize, that minutes matter. The
Yep.
research is really clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. Now, I believe in exposing kids to positive things, because I believe you are what you read. So read good stuff.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the cornerstones of my program, to teach kids how to read more. Researchers were looking at students all around the world, and they were looking for patterns. What makes students successful? And they stumbled upon a variable that just shocked them. It was the number of minutes spent reading outside of school. They looked at the low kids, the average kids, and the high kids. The kids at the bottom of the class, 20th percentile, F students, failing students, they averaged less than a minute a day reading outside of school. That didn't surprise anybody. It's probably why the kids are at the bottom of the class. But this next number did startle the researchers. The kids in the middle of the class, the 70th percentile, C
Mm-hmm.
students, average students, they average 9.6 minutes a day reading outside of school. And so when I'm doing a live training, this is usually when the room gets really quiet and the first hand raises and a parent says, well, wait a sec, are you saying if I can get my kid to read 10 minutes a day, I can take him from an F to a C? That's exactly what I'm saying. There's a lot of research to support this, but the next number really freaked people out. The students at the 90th percentile, A- students, some of your best students, do they read 3 hours a day outside of school? No. Do they read 1 hour a day outside of school every day? No. The average was just over 20 minutes a day. 20 minutes a day. This is the number I'm trying to get people to think about. And the two things people need to know about is, first of all, and we just talked about this, being read aloud to is just as powerful
Yeah.
as reading on your own. So if it takes you 10 minutes to take the kid to school each back and forth, put in an Audible book. You're covering your 20 minutes just going to and from school. Second of all, those minutes don't have to be consecutive. You can do a minute here, 3 minutes here, 5 minutes there. I mean, I think about just things that my parents did naturally when I was growing up, and they were geniuses. My mom has never received a piece of mail that she did not feel compelled to read aloud to every single person in the room. She's like, hey, Danny, I just got a letter from Mrs. Hufnagel's daughter. You remember Mrs. Hufnagel? She died 4 years before you were born. Let me read this letter. I have no interest in this whatsoever. You know, she would read aloud newspaper articles to my brother and sister and me while we were washing and drying dishes. And what I didn't realize is I was hearing that all the time, and that
Yeah.
was getting ingrained to me. So, yeah, the minutes matter. And you should start immediately. I used to have a nonprofit called Real Dads Read, and I would always challenge the dads. I'm like, hey, dad, you want to know why your kids like football so much? Because that's the only time you spend with them. If you spent your time reading to them, they'd all be readers. Because my pastor says it even better. He says, he's like, parents, you've got the easiest job on the planet. You could be the worst parent in history, and your kid doesn't know it. To them, you're mom or dad. And that's powerful. I say the same thing to teachers all the time. You might be the
Yeah.
worst teacher at that school. Your students don't know it. To them, you're their teacher. You have a responsibility.
I'm thinking of things that, like, I feel so validated because
Good.
I would always put,
That's what I'm here for.
I was stuff cassettes in the car, even when Cole, like, was some before he's even born and little. And they were business, positive thinking, well, anything. And I was like, my husband would be like, what are you doing? I'm like, it's getting in. I know it's getting in. And years later, I'll hear, and I'll be like, my son will be like, what did you do to me? And I'm like, but he loves research, education constantly. He does a lot, which one of my friends said, oh, that's not the same thing as reading. I go, what's the difference? He reads a lot on his phone.
Mhm.
He has everything. I go, what's the difference? He's reading, or it's the same thing. He
Yeah, I
loves
hear.
using his phone.
Yeah, I hear this all the time, Sandy. People always ask me, well, what do you think, Danny, electronic books or regular books? And my answer is always yes. You
Yeah,
know, I'm old. I like physical books. I'm
me
bored.
too. But he's
Yeah.
reading.
My wife she has her Kindle, and I'll tell you, I'll make an argument for why the Kindle's the greatest thing ever. I mean, first of all, she's from Singapore, so every other year we fly to Singapore, and while I'm packing 20 books in my luggage, she's packing a 1 pound Kindle that has access to the entire world's
Mm,
library. Second of
mm,
all, we both like to read in bed, and I drive her crazy because I have to have my lamp on because I need light. The Kindle illuminates itself. She doesn't need the light on. And
yeah,
then third, I'm getting older. It's tougher for me to see. You know, a lot of the books I'm reading, it's very difficult to read the text. No problem on a Kindle because you can adjust the font size. And, you know, when I hear people say that kids aren't reading nowadays, I'm like, I guarantee you that every kid in America today has been exposed to more text than a kid in the 19th century was exposed to their entire childhood.
absolutely.
So, I mean, it's actually one of the, here's a simple strategy I share with parents is they'll say, I say, turn on the closed captioning on the television set. You know, President Bush signed a very important law over 30 years ago, said every television set sold in America has to have closed captioning. And parents will say, well, wait a sec. If the show is in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a fair point. Let me make a point. Have you ever watched a TV show with subtitles and not looked at those subtitles? It's very difficult to do. Your brain is actually directed towards the text, and there's actual research that supports this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every country on the planet except for one. The country where the kids watch the most TV also has the highest reading scores. It's Finland. People always ask me, well, how can that be? I'm like, well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they do is they
Ugh,
import all these old American sitcoms like Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island, and they
yeah.
close caption them in Finnish. The kids are reading
Oh
constantly. So
my, that's genius. Oh my
easy
gosh.
strategy for everybody to incorporate. Just have the closed captioning on all the time. And I actually, now I feel like I'm just an old man. I'm blind and I'm deaf, and I actually have to have the closed captioning on, or else I
Oh
miss
my God.
something all the time.
Oh my. All right. I got to get this in because of all the things, I saw speaking, laughter, leadership, reading, and habits. Okay. And then I go to leadership. And of all the things you could have said, you told me about Joe Martin's napkins.
Oh yeah. Joe is a friend of mine. Joe Martin, a wonderful speaker. He talks about leadership. He calls it his napkin leadership philosophy. He says, now when you go into a restaurant and they give you a napkin, is your first move to stuff it down your shirt and wait for others to serve you, or is it to put over your arm to serve others? I've never liked the term servant leadership because by definition, leaders are servants, and you should be serving the people around you. So to me, he captures it perfectly with his napkin leadership philosophy.
Never heard that one. Okay. This is the big one for me. Now, you didn't know this, but my whole life I owned and operated health clubs. So the
Right.
baby steps routine trumps. It's true. If people come in and they say, I'm a couch potato, but now I'm working out 5 days a week, guess what? I'll give you 3 weeks, 3 weeks, and that's it. You're done. And that's for everything. Baby steps. So here's the deal, though. You were talking about 20 minutes of reading and how important it is.
Mm-hmm.
But what if they're not reading at all? So when the baby steps, it's got to be something that they're going to do, like a slight stretch. I mean, I found out with everything. If they're not doing anything, you try to get them to read 20 minutes a day, it doesn't work. If you start with 5 and you build up. So that's my question.
Yeah, those are the strategies that we've already talked about. I mean, that's why you read aloud to kids because then they're stuck. You got to listen to it. I mean, I make it a date night. I mean, I have 3 kids and a wife, and all of us are reading different books together. So my oldest daughter, she's into Game of Thrones, and so we're reading aloud Fire and Ice, something like that by George R. Martin. It's some of the language I don't like, but she likes it. Hey, if it's her thing, I do it. My son, he's always into military history, and so
Oh,
we read all kinds of. Actually, there's a good book. The book we're reading right now is one of my favorite books ever written, called "The Killer Angels" by Michael Shara. One of the
because my husband and son are both really into
oh
military
oh
history.
yeah, "The Killer Angels." The movie Gettysburg is based on. It's about the Battle of Gettysburg,
Oh,
and
my husband went to Gettysburg.
incredible. It's I that book you'll
No, wait, Killer, what was it
the,
called?
the
Killer.
Killer Angels by Michael Shara. He won the Pulitzer Prize for it in 1973. It's just incredible. And Sean is just amazed by it. He's like, wow, I'd never heard of this person.
Valentine gift. You just gave me my Valentine gift. All right, good.
I'll give you an even better. If you're looking for a good Valentine's Day gift, Norton Juster, who's probably most famous for writing The Phantom Toll Booth, he wrote this book back in the '60s, which won the Academy Award for Best Short Film because it was done by Chuck Jones, who did all the Bugs Bunny cartoons. But the book is called The Dot and the Line, and it's about a line who's in love with a dot, but she's dating a squiggle. And all the lines buddy's like, oh, you got to get her off your mind. He's like, I can't. She's perfect all around. And so all of a sudden, his buddies start pumping him up. Hey, they're like, that swiggle, he's got nothing. You're a line. You're like essential to public safety. And they show the line down the center of the road. They're like, you're an athlete, and they show the line in a tug of war. And they're like, oh, and you're a leader in world affairs, and they show the line that's the equator around the planet. And they're like, oh, and you can form all kinds of things. You can form squares and hexagons and polyhedrons, and all of a sudden, the dot, she's looking at him, and she's finding the line to be dazzling and mysterious and erudite. And she looks at the squiggle, and she's like, he smells. And so she runs off, and they form an exclamation point of love. It's just wonderful. It's one of my favorite Valentine's Day books.
I'm gonna stick with this, so I like that, but this I'm gonna get really big.
Yeah, The Killer Angels it's wonderful, and what I love about it is because it's about the Battle of Gettysburg, and it's written from points of view. So so you hear it from I had never heard of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Have you ever heard of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain? You may have. You were just okay. So Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, he was a professor at Bowdoin, but he thought it was his duty, Bowdoin in Maine. He thought it was his duty to enlist, and so he's second in command of this platoon. And the guy that's first in command right before the Battle of Gettysburg is promoted, and so now he's got basically 300 guys from Maine that he's in charge of. And the first order they give to him is they give him 130 Irish deserters, and they say, you need to execute these 130 Irish deserters. Well, Chamberlain, he gives this King Henry V speech to these guys. He's like, they want me to execute you. I'm not shooting anybody here. He's like, but I'd love for you to consider to fight with us, because I think this is the battle. It changes the whole war. And I, for one, I want to be able to tell my grandkids I fought. And I was ready to enlist after listening to this speech. Well, out of the 130, I think 124 of them decide to join him. And so the order for Chamberlain now is he has to hold the flank. I'm not a military guy. My brother's the military guy. But basically, the South is coming at him. And if his guys surrender, it exposes the entire Northern Army. And so he's got about 300 guys, and 9,000 Southerners are charging up the hill. He's on this hill. And all of it, they're fighting like crazy for a couple hours. Now they're all down to their last shot, and they look at Chamberlain like, what's the order? And he takes out his saber. He's like, bayonets. And they're all pumped on adrenaline, so they put their bayonets on. He's like, charge. And these guys charge down the hill, and 9,000 Southerners surrender on the spot to 300 guys. This is a true story, by the way. And he gets shot running down the hill.
Wow.
And then so the next chapter is General Hancock. Oh, I want to meet this guy. So General Hancock, he meets Chamberlain, and Chamberlain's like, oh, ready for duty. He's like, oh, calm down. You did your part. They're going to attack from the front or from the back. So you and your men, we're just going to put them safe here in the middle. So then the next chapter is General Longstreet for the South talking to General Lee. He's like, what's the order, General Lee? And Lee's like, I bet you they think, I know Hancock the way he thinks. I bet you he's going to think we're going to attack from the front to the back. Let's attack the middle, where Chamberlain and his men are. He's part of the two most important battles of the Battle of Gettysburg. He's completely outmatched, and he wins both of them. And then the end of the book, it gives you like a little paragraph about each guy. So Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, who neither of us who are educated have ever heard of, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Oh, it said he went back. He became the president of Bowdoin College. Actually, it said he wound up fighting in 7 more battles. He was wounded in every single battle. General Grant was so impressed with Chamberlain that he put Chamberlain in charge of the Southern surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. And Chamberlain endeared himself to the South when he ordered the Northern troops to salute their Southern brothers. What a class act. So then he goes back to Maine, a guy that you and I have never heard of. He becomes president of Bowdoin College. He's elected governor 4 different times with never less than 80% of the vote. The guy should be on currency, and you and I haven't even heard about him. So I'm telling you right now, your son and your hubby, they're gonna love the Killer Angels.
Well, I'm gonna challenge my husband because I'm gonna, he went to Gettysburg. He's gone to a lot of the reenactments. I'm gonna ask him if he's heard of this guy.
Oh, he'll know. He'll know. If
He
he's
will.
he'll know. He'll know Chamberlain, because Chamberlain, I think it's Little Round Top is the hill. It's very famous. But I didn't know anything. So that's
Yeah.
the book I read with my son. My youngest daughter, for some reason, she's into literature. We just read The Great Gatsby, which I've always hated that book. But after reading it aloud to my daughter, I'm like, okay.
How old is she? How's your daughter, your youngest?
She's 14. I don't know why she's into literature. She had me read Charles Dickens. Which one did we read? Oliver Twist. And I'm like, oh, I had to take a dictionary out, Sandy, on almost every single page. I'm like, it's all written.
Incredible.
It was horrible. I hated it, but she liked it.
I love that all 3 are into such different
Oh,
things.
yeah.
I mean,
And then
so different.
my wife is into, she likes happy Elizabethan pieces. There's this great series of books called The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon by Beth Brower. And they're wonderful. They're delightful. They're like so easy. She's making them longer now, but I liked it at the beginning because there was like 120 pages long, which is another way I get kids reading. I have one of the top book clubs online called lazyreaders.com, and it's a free subscription. Once a month, I update it with 10 book recommendations, 3 or 4 adult level, 3 or 4 young adult level, and 3 or 4 children's level books, all under 250 pages. So you have something to read when you're stuck in a boring meeting. Because so many books. I love reading biographies, and biographies stink, man. Like I'll read like the Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. It's like chapter 1, page 1, chapter 2, page 180. I'm like, oh, I got to read 180 pages. That's why John Grisham is such a great author. Is every chapter is like 4 pages long. And so it's 10 o'clock at night. You're in bed reading John Grisham, and it's like the chapter ends, and then he found the gun. Well, I'll just read one more chapter. But then the next chapter doesn't have to do with that. It's from like 3 chapters. Yeah. And pretty soon you're done with the book at 2 a.m. He's a genius the way he writes. There's a lot of lessons. I mean, especially in our society today, nobody has an attention span. I mean, how many people, what they said, the 1968 presidential debate, people had about a 68-second attention span for answers. And I think in the last debate between President Biden and President Trump, I think it was about a 6 seconds. I'm like, my God.
Yeah, they were saying you have 6 or 7 seconds. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Think about being a speaker and how captivating you have to be to hold the audience attention without them just.
Well, that's why you should watch speakers, because you want to see, well, when did they lose me? If they lost me. And speakers don't lose you. And so then you're trying to figure out, well, what was it that they were doing?
Yeah. Danny, we gotta go, man. I can't believe it. Time is already up. I didn't get to all my questions, but we got to a lot of them. Before we go, is there anything you want to say to the people around the world that we didn't get in, besides where we can find you? Don't worry about it.
As a thank you to you and your audience, Sandy, and I love that you're spreading joy around the world. We need a lot more of you. I wanted to give everybody a couple of freebies. So if you go to freegiftfromdanny.com. Again, freegiftfromdanny.com. I'm going to give you 2 things. First of all, I'm going to give you a book I wrote called Read, Lead, and Succeed. It's a book I wrote for an elementary school principal who was trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation, demonstrates the same concept. You read that in 5 minutes and look at the pictures. And then secondly, I'm going to give everybody access to a 5-day reading challenge I did online last summer for about 700 parents around the world, where every day for 5 consecutive days, you're with me for an hour, and I'm giving you all kinds of different strategies to get your kids to read more, read better, and again, most importantly, to love reading. Those are my gifts at freegiftfromdanny.com, and I'm just so grateful for this time we've had together, Sandy. Thank you.
You are so welcome. Besides that, how can they find you if they want to work with you or buy one of your 16 books?
Well, My name is Danny Brassell. My last name is really easy to remember how to spell. It's spelled like Bras.
Yep.
Cell. No, I never took any grief over that as a child, so that's how I get people to remember the name. And I do. Yeah, you can watch me at different events. I hold monthly speaking seminars for small groups. My buddy Jimmy Hayes Nelson and I we run them from this bourbon bar in Dallas. We get groups of 10 there once a month. We do online trainings, and then sometimes a firm just they don't want to travel, and so I'll come out to you for a couple of days to train your whole team how to speak more effectively.
All right, my let's keep it real people. Wasn't he awesome? I know that you are going to want to share this with so many people. And Danny and I would really appreciate it. And if you rate it and like it, it really does matter. And you know what I'm going to say? Until next time, bye, Danny, and toodles.
Thanks, Sandy.